They said Leah had no more tears left the day Master Brigham sold her children, both of them on the same morning. Elias, 9, was dragged out first, kicking and screaming her name until the sound was swallowed by wagon wheels. Little Willa was taken next, only 4, still clutching the corn silk doll Leah had sewn from scraps. The doll was ripped from her hand as the trader lifted her by one arm and tossed her into the cage like a barn cat. Leah didn't scream. She didn't fall. She didn't claw the earth or beg for mercy like the other mothers who had watched their own children vanish at auction. She simply went still, unnaturally still, her back straight, her eyes open as if she were staring into the future instead of the dirt under her feet. Brigham called it obedience. The overseers called it shock. The slaves in the quarters whispered another word, becoming, because something inside Leah had shifted that morning, quietly, like a knife sliding out of its sheath. Within hours, strange things began happening on the plantation, hardly noticeable at first. Chickens refused to lay. Cows kicked over their milk pails. Brigham's horse threw him twice in a single day. The overseer swore he heard footsteps behind him at night, slow and deliberate, though no one was there. And Leah, she walked with steady steps and dry eyes, as if the tears she should have shed had turned into something sharper, something waiting. By the end of the week, every man who had touched the sale, every hand involved in taking her children would regret breathing the same air as her. But no one knew that yet. No one except Leah. The sun had barely risen when the 2 wagons rattled up to the big house, their iron cages clanging like distant church bells. Leah was already awake. She had not slept, and her feet felt made of stone as she walked to the yard, summoned by an overseer with a curt flick of his whip. Brigham stood on the porch with a ledger in his hand and arrogance in his posture. He didn't look at Leah when he spoke. Men like him rarely looked at the people they owned unless they needed labor done or amusement found. 2 healthy young ones, he said to the trader, tapping the ledger. Strong for their age. The boy can work a field. The girl will fetch good breeding value. Leah's stomach twisted, but her face stayed stone. The trader, a wide-bellied man with a beard full of breakfast crumbs, smirked at her. "This the mother?" he asked. Brigham waved a hand. "Ain't relevant." Elias was dragged out first. His ankles kicked dirt, his small fists punching at air he could not win against. "Mama, Mama, please, Mama." Leah took one step forward before the overseer's whip cracked inches from her toes. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. The trader shoved Elias into the cage, locked it, and scribbled something on a paper. Leah met her son's eyes as the wagon jolted forward. That was her chance to break, to howl, to fall, but she didn't. Willa came next, half asleep, hair wrapped in little braids Leah had done the night before. Willa didn't understand, not at first. She rubbed her eyes, confused, asking softly, "Mama, where we goin'?" The trader didn't answer. He just grabbed her small arm and tossed her into the second wagon. Willa screamed, then shrill, terrified, but the world swallowed it. The wagons pulled away. The dust rose. The road swallowed her children forever. Leah stood alone. Brigham clapped his ledger shut. "Now that burden's gone. You'll work twice as hard," he said. "Children were making you slow." Still, Leah said nothing. That silence unnerved him. He expected wailing, collapsing, some sign of weakness he could mock. Not this dry-eyed stillness. Not this strange quiet that made even the overseer shift his weight. "Get to the fields," Brigham snapped. Leah walked past him, past the porch, past the place where her babies had stood only minutes earlier. Her footsteps were even, measured, deliberate. By sundown, the first man involved in their sale, the overseer who dragged Elias, would be found foaming at the mouth, claiming he'd seen a shadow follow him all day. By the next sunrise, another would vanish entirely. And before the week was done, the whole town would whisper Leah's name with a tremor, the woman who had lost everything and came back for everything. The morning after her children had been ripped from her arms, Celia walked among the remnants of the sale. The auction yard was silent except for the occasional bark of a dog or the rustling of the wind through the dry leaves. Yet, beneath the quiet, an anger simmered that no whip or chains could suppress. Every face she passed, buyer, overseer, even a few strangers, became a target in her mind. They were all complicit. She returned to the quarters that night, though quarters was a stretch. The shacks were little more than cages made of wood and mud. Inside, she could feel the hollowness where her children had been, and a fire rose in her chest, steady and unyielding. Celia's eyes scanned the room, lingering on the few personal belongings she had managed to preserve over the years. A tattered blanket, a carved wooden doll, and a set of small knives she had hidden away, sharpened secretly with stone against stone. The overseers believed that grief had broken her spirit, that her silence signaled submission. They underestimated her. While the other women moaned softly in sorrow or prayed to the Lord for deliverance, Celia was planning with patience and cunning. The next day, she took a careful walk along the edge of the plantation. Her movements were quiet and deliberate, like a predator learning the habits of its prey. She memorized the paths the buyers had taken, the guards' schedules, even the weak points in the fences that kept the enslaved confined. Celia's mind worked like a clock, every tick counting toward the moment she would reclaim justice, or what she now defined as vengeance. At night, she whispered the names of her children, her voice low and fierce: Hannah, Josiah, little Abel. Each name was a hammer blow to her will to live quietly, but also a fuel that stoked her resolve. Her plan was not just revenge. It was methodical, precise, and meant to make a statement that none would forget. By the third night, she had begun contacting other enslaved women and men she trusted. She spoke in hushed tones, carefully avoiding the ears of the overseers. "We have been taken, yes, but we are not powerless," she said. "We know the grounds, the paths, the hidden ways. We can act." Some looked at her with fear, some with awe, but all recognized the spark in her eyes, the spark that refused to be snuffed out. Her knowledge of the buyers' habits became central to her planning. She learned which men drank heavily, which oversaw multiple plantations, which slaves they distrusted and which they overestimated. Every detail was a piece in a puzzle she was piecing together, a map toward the day she would make them answer for their cruelty. Celia also began experimenting with tools, combining small amounts of herbs, concoctions she had learned from her mother, with practical devices that could immobilize or frighten. A spilled pot of water on a staircase could lead to a serious fall. A hidden pit with sharpened stakes could remove a single overseer without drawing suspicion. Every measure was calculated, and every risk measured. The plantation itself became her ally. Celia understood the winds, the rivers, the hidden hollows where no white man would dare tread at night. She knew how to move silently, how to blend into the shadows. Every step she took in the darkness brought her closer to turning her grief into a weapon. One night, as the moon hung low and full, she crept to the edge of the auction site. The buyers' cabins, lightly guarded, were within reach. She took a deep breath and whispered, "Tonight, they will understand the cost of cruelty." With that, Celia moved like the wind itself, unseen, unheard, a shadow among shadows, her hands clutching the tools of retribution she had hidden, her mind sharp with the knowledge of every weakness she had observed. In that moment, she realized that revenge was not merely a desire. It was her birthright, a reclaiming of agency from a world that had taken everything from her. Every step, every breath, every silent movement was part of a larger plan, a reckoning that would soon shake the very foundations of the town that had dared to profit from her children's suffering. The night was hers. The plantation, once a prison, had become the stage for her vengeance. And in the shadows, Celia smiled, not a smile of joy, but of inevitability. The reckoning was coming, and nothing could stop it. Celia spent the following days moving with purpose, though no one suspected. To the overseers, she was still the grieving mother, quiet, bowed, and obedient. Her eyes, however, were alight with strategy. Each movement, each word, each nod to fellow slaves was a subtle message. The plan was in motion. She had memorized every path, every door, every shadow that could conceal her approach. The town, unaware of the storm gathering, went about its normal routine while she counted hours, observed patterns, and waited for the right moment. On the third night, she began with small tests. One of the buyers, a man named Holloway, had a habit of leaving a key to his storage cabin under a stone. Celia had discovered it while fetching water at dusk. That night, she crept silently, feeling the soft mud yield beneath her bare feet. Her hand closed around the cold iron key. She whispered her plan to herself. Tonight, it begins. With the key, she accessed the cabin and found a collection of items left carelessly. Bottles of liquor, a few weapons, and a stack of papers detailing purchases and debts. Celia's mind raced. She memorized every ledger entry, every map of property, every schedule. Each detail was another lever she could pull, another point of leverage against men who believed themselves untouchable. Meanwhile, she worked to gather allies. She approached an older field hand named Ezekiel, whose knowledge of hidden trails rivaled her own. In hushed tones beneath a willow, she explained her plan, careful to avoid drawing attention. "We've been made to suffer long enough," she said. "We know the grounds, the rivers, the paths where no overseer dares tread at night. We can strike where they least expect it." Ezekiel's eyes narrowed with understanding. "You're talking about more than revenge," he whispered. "You're talking about liberation, if only for a night." Celia nodded, her gaze hard. This was about justice, but justice would be sharp, sudden, and unforgettable. By nightfall, the first phase of her plan was ready. Celia and a small group of trusted allies hid along the paths where the buyers would travel from their cabins to the auction house. She had lined the route with small traps, pits hidden under brush, buckets of water set to fall from trees, and simple tripwires designed to unbalance and terrify. Nothing lethal, yet the goal was to weaken, disorient, and instill fear before the main reckoning. The first target approached. Holloway, stumbling from the tavern, slightly inebriated. Celia's heart raced, but her hands were steady. As he stepped onto the path, a rope looped beneath his foot caught, and he stumbled into the hidden pit, cursing and scrambling to climb out. The others followed Buckley and Mertens, each encountering a different obstacle designed to exploit their habits and weaknesses. Celia watched silently from the shadows, unseen, unheard, her lips pressed into a thin line of concentration. By midnight, all 5 buyers had been ensnared in minor traps, unnerved, shaken, and fearful. Their pride was bruised, and their nerves frayed. Celia retreated briefly, disappearing into the night, letting the terror simmer. She knew the real work would come at dawn, precise, decisive, and irreversible. As the first light of morning crept over the horizon, Celia and her allies gathered near the buyers' cabins. No one had suspected she could move so freely, so quietly. The men's confusion and growing panic were visible even from a distance. She gave a brief, whispered command, and her group split into position, one to guard escape routes, one to ensure the buyers could not flee, and she herself to confront the men directly. Celia approached Holloway first. His eyes widened when he recognized her form emerging from the darkness. I don't understand," he stammered. Fear had replaced drunken bravado. Celia's gaze was unflinching. "Do you feel it now?" she asked softly, her voice a dangerous calm. "Do you understand the cost of what you've done?" Before he could react, the traps tightened. Buckley and Merton stumbled again, tripped by hidden wires, and the small arms of the field hands closed in, blocking all exits. Every man who had profited from her children's misery now felt the full weight of vulnerability. Celia's lips curled into a quiet, deadly smile. She had studied them for weeks, knew their habits, their weaknesses, and their fears. Tonight, every one of them would learn what it truly meant to take from another. The first screams pierced the early morning air, muffled but unmistakable. Celia's allies worked methodically, following her directions with precision. She had planned this night down to the smallest detail, every movement rehearsed mentally until it became instinct. There was no mercy here, no hesitation, only the cold, unyielding calculus of retribution. By the time the sun's first rays touched the plantation, the 5 buyers were reduced to trembling, broken men, their pride utterly shattered. They had been taught, in no uncertain terms, that the cost of cruelty was a reckoning they could not escape. Celia stood among them, her chest rising and falling, silent but victorious. She had reclaimed a measure of power, and the town would whisper of this night for years. And though her children were still gone, the taste of justice, sharp, bitter, and final, filled her mouth, mingling with tears she refused to shed openly. For Celia, this was only the beginning. The plan she had set in motion was far from over, and the legacy of fear and retribution she would leave was just beginning to take shape. The morning after the initial reckoning, Celia moved through the plantation like a shadow no one could track. The air was thick with smoke from lanterns that had been overturned, the residual stench of spilled liquor, and the sharp tang of fear that still clung to the 5 buyers. They huddled inside the auction house, whispering frantic words and nursing bruised egos, unable to comprehend the precision and relentlessness of the attack. But Celia did not linger near them. Her eyes were fixed on the larger circle of culpable men, the town merchants, the overseers, and the planters who had indirectly fueled her suffering. Celia knew the limits of brute force. A direct confrontation with all of them would be suicidal. Instead, she relied on subtle terror, manipulation, and carefully timed retribution. In the shadows, she moved silently from street to alley, from barn to stable, leaving tokens of warning: a boot nailed to a door upside down, a spilled lantern forming the shape of a cross, a single braid of hair pinned to a fence with a knife. Each symbol carried a quiet but unmistakable message: your time is short, your sins are known. By mid-morning, the market square became a theater of dread. Traders who had long exploited enslaved labor began to notice the signs, notes written in charcoal, small effigies hanging by the river, the scent of herbs and resin that Celia had learned to blend herself. Panic began to ripple outward. Small children whispered of witches in the night. Wives pulled their husbands aside to question their safety. Overseers, once arrogant, now scanned every shadow with trembling eyes. Celia's allies, trained and disciplined, moved like ghosts under her command. Ezekiel guided the group through hidden pathways, leading them to supply rooms, barns, and stables where the more minor perpetrators gathered to discuss deals and bribes. Each location was carefully mapped, each exit noted, and each man's habits catalogued. Celia had become an archivist of their behaviors, memorizing which men drank heavily at dusk, which had a fear of dogs, which slept with doors unlocked, and which were prone to sudden, irrational movements. By dusk, Celia initiated the next phase. Lanterns were extinguished across the town, giving the night an unnatural darkness. From her hiding place near the riverbank, she could hear the first waves of disorientation. Shouts, the sound of someone tripping over a rope, a scream that pierced the air, and the subtle scuffle of fleeing feet. Each act was calculated. None lethal yet, but each a taste of helplessness, a prelude to what was coming. The 5 original buyers, already traumatized, were forced to witness their peers' terror from a distance. Their faces drained of color as they saw merchants stumble blindly, overseers fall into hidden pits, and small fires flare mysteriously along the perimeter. Celia watched them, silent, a mixture of grief and triumph coiling in her chest. The town was beginning to understand that their actions had consequences far beyond their imagination. When she finally moved closer to the source of greatest power, the local magistrate who had authorized many of the auctions Celia approached alone, her presence cloaked in the night and in the authority of justice she had claimed for herself. She had left the townsfolk whispers in every ear. Justice comes for those who steal, those who exploit, those who harm the innocent. The magistrate, expecting nothing, was found in his study, papers strewn across the floor. Celia's hand reached for the ledger detailing enslaved families' sales, the document that had orchestrated the destruction of her own children. She opened it, revealing the names of every man who had touched or profited from the suffering she endured. One by one, she marked each name with a charcoal cross. Her fingers were steady, her pulse unshaken. "This is the record of reckoning," she whispered, her voice cutting through the silence of the room. "Every choice you've made, every cruelty you've enacted, every family you've destroyed, it will find you." The magistrate's eyes widened in terror, understanding too late the magnitude of what he faced. Celia's allies emerged from the shadows, securing exits and preventing escape. The trap was complete, a network of fear and discipline, poised to deliver the final lesson. By midnight, Celia had returned to the shadows of the riverbank, observing the town as disarray grew into chaos. The men who had wielded authority were reduced to panic, their pride shattered, their control evaporating. Word of strange events, missing livestock, toppled carts, sudden accidents began to spread among the townspeople. Every sound in the night was perceived as an omen, every shadow a potential threat. Celia's children were still gone, yet she felt the faintest stirrings of victory. Each act of terror, each carefully executed plan, was a message to the oppressors and a balm to her wounded soul. The echoes of her retribution traveled faster than any horse, reaching into every corner of the town, seeding fear, doubt, and the first taste of humility. And though she remained hidden, watching silently from the river's edge, Celia knew that the real reckoning had only just begun. For every act of cruelty perpetrated against her and her family, a corresponding act of calculated justice would unfold, precise and inescapable. The town had yet to see the full measure of her plan, and when it did, no man would walk through the streets without remembering her name. The following morning, the town awoke to a creeping unease. Windows were shuttered, gates bolted, and the usual clamor of merchants and traders was replaced by hushed whispers. Celia watched from her perch along the riverbank, wrapped in a dark shawl that had once belonged to her mother. Her eyes scanned the market square, the rows of homes, and the narrow alleys, every detail meticulously memorized, every movement anticipated. Today, her plan would escalate. The first targets were the minor players who had overseen the sale of her children, men who had boasted, laughed, and spat upon the families they divided. Celia's allies, disciplined and silent, moved through the town in pairs. Each carried a satchel containing items of subtle terror, herbs that caused nausea and dizziness, powders that left faint, stinging welts on exposed skin, and small tokens marked with ominous symbols she had learned from old folk tales and whispered legends. By mid-morning, the first incidents began. An overseer stumbled into a hidden pit, arms flailing, yelping as he hit the soft dirt below. Another, attempting to flee, discovered his boots filled with tar, the sticky substance pulling him to the ground, leaving him humiliated and screaming. Celia's allies worked with precision, striking swiftly, retreating into shadows before the victims could identify them. Each act was designed to instill fear without causing permanent harm, a lesson in helplessness and a prelude to the consequences that would follow for the more powerful men. Celia herself moved closer to the center of power, the warehouse where the town's wealthiest merchants kept their ledgers and accounts. This building had been central to the trade that tore her family apart, and she had memorized every entry and ledger, every name and date. With nimble fingers, she removed the lock on a side door and slipped inside, the wooden floor creaking only faintly under her weight. The room smelled of old paper, dust, and the faint tang of ink. She moved quickly, copying the names of those who had purchased enslaved children, recording them in her own ledger. By afternoon, the town's sense of order had completely eroded. Reports of strange sounds, scratching, soft cries, shadows flitting along walls spread like wildfire. Merchants and overseers attempted to organize, to confront the threat, but their authority had vanished. Even those who had not directly harmed Celia felt the chill of impending retribution. Celia's children, though still absent, remained central to her plans. She had received whispered rumors from sympathetic neighbors, hints about where they might be held. A network of trusted allies, people who had witnessed her suffering and recognized her determination, passed on these fragments of information. Every piece was crucial, every whisper was a clue. As evening fell, she prepared for the night's most daring move. The warehouse would serve as the stage for a demonstration, a calculated spectacle designed to show the town that her vengeance was deliberate, unrelenting, and impossible to ignore. She positioned subtle markers around the exterior, a spilled ink bottle forming a cross on the steps, a faint trail of herbs leading to a window, and small effigies hung from beams that would sway in the night breeze. When darkness fell, Celia's presence became almost mythic. She moved silently along rooftops and alleyways, ensuring each act of intimidation occurred precisely as planned. An overseer leaning against a wall felt the brush of cold, unseen fingers along his neck. A merchant opening a door found a rat scurrying out of his ledger stack. The town was a theater, and she was both playwright and director. The culmination came when Celia placed a final token at the feet of the magistrate who had sanctioned the sales. A small bundle of herbs, a braid of her own hair, and a scrap of the ledger showing the names of her children and their purchasers. The magistrate, discovering it in the dim glow of his lantern, realized with dawning horror that he had underestimated the scope of her reach, the depth of her planning, and the intensity of her fury. Celia stepped back into the shadows, watching as fear settled like a tangible mist over the town. Her plan had advanced another stage, the first wave of intimidation complete. And yet, the real objective, rescuing her children and exacting ultimate justice, remained. As she retreated to the riverbank, her eyes scanned the horizon. The night was quiet now, but she knew the town's anxiety would not fade. The whispers of her vengeance would grow, stories passed from house to house, mother to child. Each act of subtle terror, each small success, fed the larger purpose: to dismantle the power of those who had thought they could control her family, and to reclaim what had been stolen. In the distance, the first hints of dawn lit the sky, revealing the silhouettes of men too frightened to move, their pride shattered. Celia knew the night had been only the beginning, the true reckoning, and the reunion with her children were still to come, and she would not rest until every name on her ledger had felt the weight of her justice. The morning sun rose over the town like a reluctant witness. Its light fell on streets empty of merchants and overseers. Their bravado dissolved overnight into whispers and frantic gossip. Celia crouched atop a low hill beyond the river, her cloak damp from the early dew. She held in her hands the ledger she had stolen from the warehouse, pages bristling with names, dates, and addresses, every clue she would need to reach her children. Today, her plan would shift from subtle terror to direct action. She moved with deliberate care through the outskirts of the town, avoiding main streets and patrolling guards. Her mind replayed the map she had memorized over the previous weeks, a sequence of back alleys, hidden garden paths, and forgotten fences. Each landmark marked the location of children, their keepers, and the routes she would take. Her pulse quickened, not with fear, but with determination. She had been patient, careful, and now the moment to act had arrived. The first stop was a small, brick storage house near the northern edge of the square. It held 2 of her children, locked in a makeshift cage. Celia had observed it from the shadows the previous night, noting the guard's schedule and the locations of spare keys. Silently, she slipped through a side window, her movements ghost-like. The lock yielded easily to a thin wire she had fashioned into a picking tool. Within moments, she stood before her children, a boy and a girl, wide-eyed and trembling. "Mother," whispered the girl, her voice quivering with hope and disbelief. Celia's heart ached at the sight of their fear, but she swallowed it, focusing on the task. "Stay close to me, quietly. No one must see us." She slipped a small, dark scarf over their heads to obscure them and led them to the hidden exit she had prepared, a small trapdoor beneath a pile of crates. Each step was measured, each breath controlled. Outside, the riverbank awaited as a temporary sanctuary, its reeds offering cover and concealment. The next stop was a larger, more guarded compound where 3 other children were held. The building loomed like a fortress, overseers patrolling its perimeter in a slow, predictable rhythm. Celia timed her approach with precision, moving during the guard's brief shift change. She scaled the back wall with the aid of a rope ladder, its fibers worn but dependable. Her heart pounded as she reached the top, peering into the darkened courtyard. The children were inside a small room, their heads pressed against bars, their tiny hands reaching through. She picked the lock on the door with practiced skill. The click sounded like a distant bell in the silent night. One by one, she ushered them out, keeping them pressed against her body to ensure they made no sound. Below, the guard paused, then resumed his pacing, unaware of the intruder above him. Celia's pulse slowed slightly as she descended the rope, the children clinging to her like lifelines. With 5 of her children now gathered, Celia had to consider her final, and most dangerous, stop. the manor house of the wealthiest buyer, who kept her eldest children in a reinforced cellar. This man was notorious for cruelty and cunning. Approaching the estate required a calculated risk. Celia moved along the tree line, mapping out the sentries, noting the lanterns swinging from the walls. Every shadow, every flicker of light became part of her mental blueprint. The cellar door was hidden beneath a stack of firewood. Celia carefully removed the wood, revealing the thick, iron-bound door. She could hear muffled cries from within. Her fingers worked quickly, manipulating the lock. Each click echoed in her ears, but no one emerged to investigate. Finally, the door swung open, revealing 3 more of her children. The eldest, a boy of 12, stared at her in disbelief. "Mother?" he whispered, hope and confusion mingling in his eyes. "Quietly," Celia cautioned, guiding them into the night. One misstep could ruin everything. As they emerged from the shadow of the manor, the riverbank beckoned once more, a safe passage into freedom for now. The children clung to her hands and cloak, trust absolute in the bond they shared. As dawn's first light painted the horizon, Celia paused atop the riverbank. All 8 children were now with her, hidden beneath the reeds and mist. She allowed herself a moment to breathe, her mind racing ahead to the next phase. The town's merchants and overseers would soon discover the empty cells and cages. Panic would erupt, and her window of escape would shrink rapidly. Celia's gaze swept the horizon, assessing the safest route to the forest beyond the town. Each child's hand in hers was a promise, each step taken a defiance against the power that had torn them from their lives. She whispered soft encouragements, words to calm their fear and steel their courage. The river mist swirled around them, as if the very land acknowledged their right to escape, to reclaim what had been stolen. In the distance, the first shouts rose from the town. Celia knew the hunters would come, alerted by missing children and panicked overseers. But she was ready. She had planned for this. The escape would not be easy, but it would be done. The children were her life, and she would not falter. With the river at her side and the forest ahead, Celia began the slow, deliberate march toward freedom, each step a testament to her cunning, her resolve, and the lengths a mother would go to reclaim her family. The forest loomed like a shadowed fortress as Celia led her children through the dense undergrowth. Every snapped twig underfoot felt deafening in the quiet of dawn, every rustle of leaves a possible threat. She had memorized this path, its twists and hidden hollows, during her long nights of planning. Yet now it felt like the forest itself conspired against her roots, snagging her cloak, vines curling around her ankles, the mist turning familiar shapes into specters. The children followed in near silence, their small hands clinging to hers. The eldest boy, 12 but already hardened by months of captivity, scanned the tree line for danger, while the youngest clutched his mother's skirts, eyes wide and frightened. Celia's heart ached at the sight, but she could not pause, could not allow fear to break their fragile courage. Behind them, she could hear the first distant sounds of pursuit, shouts faint at first, growing sharper, and the clatter of boots on the dirt path. She had anticipated this, of course, and had prepared diversions along the route. A broken branch here, a hastily thrown cloak there, all designed to confuse any tracker. But she knew it would not be enough. The town's hunters were skilled, and they had already tasted the chaos of her previous raids. A sudden noise, a snapping of a limb, caused her heart to leap. She pressed the children against the nearest tree trunks, whispering instructions. "Keep low, no sound. Stay with me." They obeyed instantly, faces pressed into the bark, holding their breath as the first pursuers neared the forest edge. 2 men burst through the trees, torches in hand, eyes wide and searching. Celia could see the panic in their movements, the uncertainty that came when the prey had outwitted the hunters. She counted silently. 2, then 3, then 4, until she had accounted for the number of hunters she had estimated would follow. Her mind raced. She could not fight them all, not directly. The children's safety depended on her cunning, not on brute strength. She motioned for the eldest to take the lead, with the youngest hiding in the center. Celia herself moved to the flank, eyes scanning for the trap she had prepared. Hours before, she had planted a series of snares along a narrow pass where the pursuers would be forced to follow. She led them there now, hoping the men would be slow and predictable enough to fall into her carefully constructed web. The first snare, a simple but sturdy loop of rope hidden beneath the leaves, caught the leg of a man mid-step. His scream echoed through the trees, sharp and panicked. Celia did not flinch. She pressed on, knowing the next snares would come quickly. One by one, the hunters became entangled, their torches extinguished as they struggled against the hidden traps. The forest, once silent, erupted in chaos, shouts, curses, and the snapping of branches as men fell to the ground or became ensnared in her clever devices. The children pressed closer, their small hands trembling but their eyes wide with awe. Celia whispered encouragements, urging them onward through the winding path she knew like the lines on her own palms. Every turn, every sudden dip in the trail was a part of her plan, a way to ensure that the hunters would not recover quickly and that her precious charges could move safely toward the river that marked the beginning of true freedom. Hours passed, each step exhausting but necessary. The sounds of pursuit faded behind them, muffled by the forest and the snare traps. Celia allowed herself a moment to glance at her children. Their faces were smeared with dirt, hair tangled and wet from dew, but they were alive. The fear in their eyes had not disappeared entirely, but it had been tempered with the first spark of hope. As dusk approached, she led them to a hidden hollow near a stream, a place she had discovered weeks before while mapping escape routes. The children collapsed onto the moss-covered ground, exhausted but safe for the moment. Celia sat beside them, her body trembling from fatigue, her mind already calculating the next phase. They would rest here, but not for long. The river awaited, and beyond it, the promise of sanctuary. Celia's heart beat heavily in her chest, both from exhaustion and from the awareness that the danger was far from over. She had outsmarted the hunters so far, but the town's network of pursuers would not stop until they had captured her children. She whispered to the eldest boy, "We move before nightfall. Stay alert. Do not let anyone see you." In the fading light, she scanned the horizon. The forest held its secrets well, and tonight it would shield them. But tomorrow, the challenges would increase. Celia knew that the path to freedom was a long one, fraught with peril, and that every choice she made could mean life or death for her family. Yet, despite the fear, she felt an undeniable surge of determination. The forest had been their ally, her planning had been meticulous, and the children, her heart, her very soul, were with her. Together, they would face whatever came next. She tightened her grip on their small hands and whispered, "We are stronger than they believe, and we will not be taken. Not now. Not ever." The river murmured nearby, promising passage and sanctuary, and Celia allowed herself the briefest of smiles. Freedom was within reach, and she would see it through to the end. Dawn broke pale and gray over the horizon, the river shimmering like liquid steel in the early light. Celia gathered her children from the mossy hollow, brushing dew from their hair and clothing. Their bodies ached, limbs stiff from the long march through the forest, but she could not afford to pause. Today was the day they would cross the river, the final barrier between them and the freedom that had once seemed a distant, impossible dream. The sound of running water grew louder as they approached the bank. Celia scanned the opposite shore. Low trees and thick brush concealed the path she had scouted in secret weeks before. It was narrow and treacherous, but it led to a hidden bend in the river where a small skiff, left by a friend of the underground network, awaited them. Her heart beat faster at the sight, a mix of hope and fear twisting in her chest. She crouched beside the children, whispering, "Stay low, move slow, and follow my lead. If anyone sees us, run straight into the trees and do not stop." The eldest boy nodded grimly, his face smeared with mud, eyes sharp and alert. The youngest held his mother's hand tightly, lips trembling but silent. Celia's heart swelled with both love and terror. One wrong step, one careless movement, and everything would be lost. As they crept toward the river, the unmistakable sound of pursuit echoed behind them, a distant, hurried clatter of boots and shouts. Celia froze, pressing the children against the earth, heart hammering. The hunters had survived some of her snares, it seemed, and now the final chase had begun. The river, once their salvation, might become their tomb if they were caught before reaching the hidden skiff. She motioned for the children to follow closely as she darted forward, using every shadow, every bend in the undergrowth to conceal their progress. The eldest boy helped guide the youngest, keeping him low to the ground, while Celia herself scanned constantly, every rustle and shift of leaves a potential threat. The shouts grew louder, closer. The hunters were relentless, their voices thick with fury and disbelief that the slave mother had evaded them for so long. Suddenly, a rope stretched across the path, camouflaged with branches and leaves. Celia dove forward, dragging the children behind her as the first hunter tripped violently over the trap, crashing into the underbrush with a cry. She did not pause. The river was so close she could taste its wet, iron-heavy scent. She pushed them faster, hearts pounding, breaths ragged with fear and exertion. At last, they reached the bend in the river. There, half hidden under overhanging willows, lay the small skiff. Celia scrambled down the bank, hauling the children after her, keeping low, every sense alert. The eldest boy helped the youngest into the boat first, and then Celia climbed in herself, heart thundering with anticipation and dread. She pushed off with trembling hands, the skiff moving silently over the glassy water. Behind them, the first of the hunters appeared at the river's edge, eyes wide with fury as they realized the slaves were escaping. Shouts rang across the water, but Celia's grip on the oar never faltered. She rowed with furious determination, each stroke carrying them farther from the plantation, farther from the lives of fear and oppression they had known. The children's eyes, wide and alert, met hers, reflecting both exhaustion and burgeoning hope. The skiff drifted into a narrow channel, hidden by thick reeds and willows. The hunters shouted curses and threats, but their voices grew distant, unable to reach the thick foliage and twisting waterways. Celia allowed herself a brief glance back, heart still racing, and saw the hunters falter at the bank, unsure where the river wound or how to follow without revealing themselves. Hours passed as they moved slowly through the concealed channels, each bend in the water offering both concealment and danger. Celia's arms ached, muscles burning with exhaustion, but the children's safety and their freedom pressed her forward with renewed vigor. Every shadow could hide a predator. Every sound could be a pursuer. Yet each passing moment also brought them closer to liberation. As the sun climbed higher, they reached a shallow landing. Celia guided the children onto firm ground, scanning the dense woods around them. Here, the river widened into open water that would soon carry them toward the sanctuary they had long sought, a haven of free people and safe passage. The children collapsed, panting, trembling, but alive. Celia knelt beside them, pressing them into her embrace, whispering, "We are not safe yet, but we are closer than ever. You will know freedom soon." From the opposite bank, the hunters' voices grew faint, fading into the distance as the river carried Celia and her children forward. The currents tugged at the skiff, steady and strong, guiding them toward the promise of safety. Celia's mind raced, plotting the next steps, calculating how to navigate hidden channels and avoid detection until they reached the sanctuary. As evening fell, the sky turning violet and gold, they finally reached a small cove where friendly hands waited allies who had prepared a hidden shelter and food, and who would guide them further toward freedom. Tears streamed down Celia's face as she helped the children from the boat. Exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, yet a fierce surge of relief and triumph washed over her. They had survived. Against impossible odds, they had outwitted the hunters, traversed the forest, and crossed the river. She hugged them tightly, whispering words of comfort and encouragement, vowing silently that she would protect them until the end. The nightmare of their past, the chains, the cruelty, the stolen family had been endured, but here, in this hidden refuge, the first true sense of safety and autonomy bloomed. Celia knew the journey was not over, but the most dangerous leg had passed. For the first time in years, hope was tangible, almost touchable, and she allowed herself a moment to feel it fully. The children's laughter, quiet but unmistakable, was the sweetest sound she had ever heard. Tomorrow, they would move again, deeper into safety. But tonight, for the first time, they were free enough to rest, to breathe, and to dream of the life that had been promised but never given. The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves and the distant chorus of crickets. Celia sat by the fire in the hidden cabin deep within the swampland, her children huddled close to her, faces flushed with exhaustion and relief. Outside, the thick mist curled around the cypress trees, hiding them from any prying eyes. This was a sanctuary, a sliver of freedom carved from the wilderness, and for the first time in their lives, Celia allowed herself to feel that freedom, if only fleetingly. Months had passed since that harrowing night on the river, the night she had carried her children through darkness and danger to safety. The memory of the plantation, the screams of the auction block, the cruel hands of the masters, still lingered, an almost tangible weight on her shoulders. She had known that revenge had been a necessity, not for cruelty, but for survival. Each step she had taken, every calculated move through the forests and waterways, had been a step toward reclaiming what had been stolen. Her family, her children, her dignity. The cabin was small, constructed of cypress and reclaimed lumber, yet it was theirs. The smell of burning pine filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of river mud. Her eldest son, now older, meticulously sharpened a small set of tools, remnants from the river crossing, while her younger children tended to the fire, learning skills that would ensure they would never again be entirely at the mercy of others. Celia watched them silently, a surge of pride and sorrow intertwining. They were strong, but she had borne them through suffering that no child should ever know. In the weeks following their flight, word had reached them of the chaos left behind at the plantation. The masters, humiliated and terrified, had been forced to reckon with the aftermath of her cunning. One by one, their attempts to track her had failed, thwarted by traps she had set or by the confusion of the swamplands, a labyrinth she had mastered. Rumors spread among neighboring plantations of the slave mother who had disappeared into the marshes with her children, of her cunning and ferocity, of the vengeance she had delivered without mercy. Celia had become a ghost story, a whispered warning to those who sought to dominate and dehumanize. But even in this relative peace, she remained vigilant. Every shadow could conceal a pursuer, every unexpected sound might signal a search party. She taught her children to be aware, to move silently, to respect the land that protected them. Each day, they ventured further from the cabin, learning the paths of the swamp, the hidden channels of the river, the places where food could be foraged and where enemies could not follow. Freedom was not just a place, she told them. It was knowledge, vigilance, and unity. At night, when the children slept, Celia allowed herself to remember, to feel the emotions she had suppressed during the day. She remembered the faces of those who had tried to break her, the cold, unfeeling eyes of the masters who thought her children were mere property. She remembered the fear, the desperation, the sharp sting of injustice, and yet, with each memory, a sense of triumph mingled. She had outsmarted them, survived their cruelty, and carved a path to liberty where there had been none. In the darkest hours, she whispered prayers to the river, to the trees, to the spirits of ancestors who had suffered and resisted long before her. She gave thanks for the strength in her body, the cunning in her mind, the love that had bound her family together even in the face of unimaginable odds. The swamp had been both a prison and a shield. The river had been both a path and a weapon. And now, it had delivered her and her children to safety. Years passed. The children grew into capable, independent individuals, their skills honed by necessity, their spirits tempered by the trials of escape and survival. Celia watched as they learned to navigate the complex networks of freedom, crossing into safe houses, trading knowledge, and helping others like them who still endured the yoke of bondage. Her heart ached for those left behind, for those still trapped in chains, but she had become a symbol of hope, a living testament to the possibility of liberation through courage, intelligence, and unwavering love. And in the quiet moments, when the fire burned low and the night pressed close, Celia felt the weight of her journey settle upon her. She had done what no one believed possible. She had protected her children, outwitted her oppressors, and built a life where freedom, however fragile and tentative, was real. The swamp whispered around her, as it always had, a murmur of approval or perhaps a recognition of the debts paid and the lives spared. Celia's story spread far and wide in whispers, in letters carried by travelers, in the hushed tones of those who had heard of the mother who had defied cruelty itself. Some said she had become a myth, a shadow in the marshes, appearing only when the cries of injustice demanded a response. Others claimed she had left the swamps entirely, venturing north with her children to lands where freedom was guaranteed. None could confirm her path, but all agreed on one truth. The woman who had faced the plantation, the hunters, the relentless cruelty of masters and their allies, had emerged undefeated. In her final reflection by the river, Celia held her children close once more, feeling the pulse of their hearts and the warmth of their small bodies. She whispered a vow that the legacy of their struggle, the lessons of resilience and cunning, would never be forgotten. They were free, not only in body but in spirit, carrying within them the fire of resistance and the memory of those who had dared to fight against the unyielding tide of oppression. The sun rose over the swamp, golden and forgiving, and for the first time, Celia allowed herself to breathe fully, unburdened, surrounded by the family she had fought and bled for. The river carried away the last remnants of fear, and the swamp, ever vigilant, seemed to bow in quiet acknowledgement of her triumph. In the land that had threatened to swallow them, she had carved life and liberty from the hands of death itself. The story of Celia, the mother who defied a world built on cruelty and chains, would echo across the generations, a testament to the strength of love, cunning, and unbreakable will. And in that echo, freedom, once thought impossible, became a living, breathing reality for her children, and for all those who dared to follow the path she had blazed through the darkness.